That's much. Hello, everybody. My name is Jose Romero. I am one of the reference librarians here at West Orange Public Library. I have the distinct honor of presenting Deacon Peter. We are going to be discussing a poet that I do not know much about, but his name is Aimé Césaire. Did I pronounce that right, Deacon?
It's Aimé Césaire.
Exactly. And so at this moment, I leave the floor to Deacon Peter.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Jackson. I studied in France. I speak French fluently. I was also a professor of French language and literature at the university in my home country, Guyana, which is in South America, the only English-speaking country in South America. So Aimé Césaire is one of the authors that I study. And so it is very interesting and refreshing for me to have this opportunity to go back and to reconnect myself with the work of French Caribbean literature, and especially of this author, Aimé Césaire. I noticed you were struggling with the pronunciation, so it's Aimé, A-I-M-E, with an accent to the end, and an accent to the end is, in French, is pronounced A, so it's Aimé and Césaire. Now, first for a little bit of context. So to understand Aimé Césaire's poem, he is just one of the most famous French West Indian writers. There are many others. There's Léon Damas from French Guiana, and you know, there's several others who have come down, both novelists and poets. But Aimé Césaire is one of the first. But to give you context, is that he was born in Martinique. Martinique, there are two French islands in the Caribbean, that is Martinique and Guadeloupe. And there's a third territory, not an island, on the coast of South America, next to my country, that's French Guiana. And so you have these two islands, Guadeloupe and Martinique, and then you have French Guiana, and those are the French territories in the Caribbean, much smaller than the British, because you must understand that during in the early period, all these islands change hands frequently. Like St. Lucia was once French, even my Guyana was once French, and so they changed very frequently. So you would understand that France, like Britain, like the Spanish in Cuba and in Santo Domingo, they control these countries, and where they brought slaves to occupy these countries and to work the fields for their own enrichment. But after a while, you understand that the people gave children, and you have a first generation and a second generation working there, and gradually slavery was abolished. People started to learn French and English and Spanish. And so you have a new cadre of citizens in those countries. Of course, they were still being controlled by the French and the British and Spanish. So what happens here is that there was little education at first, and then they started to educate the children of the former slaves. So in Martinique, there was a high school in Martinique called Martinique Chéchère, the École Chéchère. And that was the only high school for students in Martinique, Guadeloupe, and French Guiana. So students from French Guiana had to travel all the way to Martinique to go to this high school. And that is the context in which this little boy called Aimé Césaire, in which he grew up, and he was brilliant. His father was a civil servant, and so he he was able to go to this high school. And from he did very well. So he went to France. They sent him to France. He got a scholarship to go to France. And he eventually ended up, and you wouldn't know this, but there's in the French system, there's what they call a école, which is school, normale, supérieure, the école normale supérieure. That is like the highest level you could go to in France. It's very renowned. To go to the école normale supérieure, you are like, you got to be good, like going to Harvard or Long Cambridge, Oxford in England,
Yeah.
And so he got to go to École Normale Supérieure. So it was while he was now there at École Normale Supérieure, he met, this is the first time that he is going to meet with Black people from the other parts of the world. From Africa, he met with people, even from so he met with all these different peoples in Paris there. And then he realized that they all had the same thing in common. They were colonial citizens and they had been assimilated into French culture. Now, having been educated in an English culture and studied in a French culture, one of the greatest things about colonialism is that it tries to assimilate you into the dominant culture. And so Aimé Césaire, like all the others, were assimilated into the French culture. First, the French language. They mastered the French language just as well as the French could, and assimilated all the ideas of the philosopher. You remember Descartes? Je pense donc je suis, I think therefore I am, and all those other philosophers, you assimilate all of that. Your way of thinking, and all the images that they put to you, not only about France, about the greatness of France, but also about yourself. So when these guys gathered in Paris and started to exchange ideas, they realized that they were outsiders, because what they had been taught about the greatness of France, the openness of France, the welcomeness of France, when they arrived there, they found that it was a different situation. And why it was different? It was because of this black skin that nobody likes. And so they realized that, hey, this is a different game. And so he met, for example, a guy called Léopold Senghor. You might not have heard about Léopold Senghor, but Léopold Senghor, like Césaire, was from Africa, from Senegal, and both of them were two of the greatest literary products of French colonialism. In fact, Senghor was even admitted to what they call the Académie Française. The Académie Française is where they invite you based on the quality of your creative work, you then get to be a member of the Académie Française. And Senghor was a member of the Académie Française. And another thing about Senghor and Césaire is that both of them became politicians. Senghor ended up being the president of Senegal, and Césaire, he was the mayor of Fort-de-France, which is the capital of Martinique, and also he was a deputy in the French Parliament. Of course, they always say that poets never make good politicians.
True.
And so in France, having now this cross-cultural assimilation with other Black people, they realized that, Blackness was their problem. And so Césaire took the derogatory term, nègre in French, which, in English here is nigger, which they call the N-word. In French, it is nègre. And he took it and changed it around to express what he considered the inequality of being Black. He called it négritude. And so that is what he's known for, négritude. And they started a magazine called L'Étudiant Noir, that means Black student. And that is where they started to write a lot of articles about being Black, about colonialism, about the French society and their role in the French society, what they thought about it. For them, it was like an awakening, right? So Césaire qualified, he got his degrees, and he was about to return to Martinique, where he was going to be a teacher at the same school that he went to, Lycée Césaire. So he went to Croatia. He had a very good friend in France, a white guy who was from Croatia, and he went to Croatia, for a little holiday before he returned. And when he went to Croatia, he found that the topography, the whole place, reminded him of his Martinique, and that is where he started to write this book, Cahiers d'un retour au pays natal, because he knew he was going back home. He knew he was going back home, and so that is where he wrote this Cahiers d'un retour au pays natal. So let us talk first about the title. Cahier. Cahier is the French for a notebook. And some while this edition that I have says just return to my native land, other editions would put notebook on a return to the native land. So it's a cahier. It is not a journal. It is not a journal. It's a poem. It's a lyrical poem. He liked, for example, at that time, you had French writers like Arthur Rimbaud and Mallarmé, and they kind of moved away from the structure of French poetry. Like we have this in English. I don't know what you call it in Spanish. In English, we call it the iambic pentameter. And in French, you call it the Césaire, which is 6 beats in poetry and with rhyme. So you go pam padam 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 da 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 dam padam padam padam. 6 beats. So you have like a poet like Verlaine who would say, il pleure dans mon cœur comme il pleut sur la ville. Quelle est cette langueur qui pénètre mon cœur? Right? So dam badam 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 badam. So these new writers in France, these like Mallarmé and Baudelaire, Baudelaire, the great poet, they kind of moved away from this structure of the iambic pentameter or Césaire, and they started to write a more freer verse. And so that is what influenced Césaire quite a lot to write this poem. This is a long poem, a lyrical poem. That is what convinced him to write it in this form. It gives you a lot of freedom, but you still observe certain rules of poetry that you will notice that in this book here, there's a lot of repetition, and repetition is also a part of poetry. And then the play upon words, he even invented words, and that is what gives it its difficulty, that he invented words, words that can be translated, So that is how this poetry is structured, and its beat is not within the line of the poem. The beat is in the body of the poem by the repetition that you have au bout du petit matin, right? So let's look at that. The first line of the poem is au bout du petit matin, at the end of the dawn. It doesn't ring well in English, at the end of the dawn, but to say au bout du petit matin, there is a rhythm there in itself, right? You know, at the end of the round, it's in Spanish is what you do. The madrugada, la madrugada. That's what you say in Spanish, or el amanecer. Right? But
Yes.
to say in French they call it the little morning, the small of the morning. That is what it translates as. Au bout du petit matin, right? The petit matin, like you have a petit déjeuner, you know, like breakfast in French. Breakfast in French is le petit déjeuner. The little breakfast. The petit déjeuner. So you have here au bout du petit matin, at the end of the petit matin. So what happens at the end of the petit matin? You know, when the sun starts to rise, you could hardly see it. It's a dull light, you know, and there's a sunshine. But when they at the end of that period, what happens? We have the full effect of the sunlight, which is going to shine on the city, on you, on all of us, and to reveal to us in clarity our reality.
Yes.
So that
Yes.
is, you know, au bout du petit matin, the end of this. So he starts out this poem here, and he says, I'm going to read a little bit in French, and then I'm going to read it in English. And the first page,
Yes.
page 8, he says, Va-t'en, lui dis-je, gueule de flic, gueule de vache, va-t'en, je déteste les labrins de l'or et les hannetons de l'espérance. Va-t'en, mauvais grigui, punaise de monignon. Puis, je me tourne vers des paradis. Pour lui, et les saints perdus, plus calme que la face d'une femme qui ment. Et là, bercé par les effluves d'une pensée jamais laissée, je nourrissais le vent, je délaçais les monstres et j'étendais mon trait de l'autre côté du désastre, un fleuve de tourterelles et des trèfles de la savane. And so if we translate that in English, and you heard it in French, you know, va-t'en, disait, lui disais-je, go away.
Yeah.
In English, it doesn't have the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
It's like Spanish. I was listening to a Spanish soap opera, and the person was chasing the person away and saying, "Cállate, cállate." Look at the force of that. Look at the force of that. And in French is va-t'en, va-t'en, right? It doesn't have the same emotive force in English. But it says, but we translate. It says, "Go away," I said, with your mug of a cuppa. And sometimes these things are difficult to translate. A gueule de flic. A flic is the French colloquial word for a policeman, right?
Yes.
If you go to France, you'll never hear anybody saying a policeman. They'll always say les flics, right? And gueule, with gueule means like mouth, but not in a pejorative sense, right? In a pejorative sense. Gueule de flic. Va-t'en, je déteste les labrins de l'or. Go away, go away. I hate the flunkies of order and the beetles of hope. Go away, you evil charm, like the punk of a monk. Then I turned towards heavens, lost to him and his own kind. Heavens more calm than the face of a woman who lies. And there, lulled by the effluvia of endless thoughts, I fed the wind. I untied the monsters, and I heard rise from the other bank of disaster a river of turtle doves and the clovers of savannah. I still carry deep inside me at inverse depths of the 28th floor of the most insolent houses, and as guard against the putrefying power and ambient twilight surveyed by night and day by the cursed foxy sun. So he says there right here now is, in this return, he is invaded by thoughts of the past, thoughts of what this country and what. When he talks about this I hate the flunkies of order. You know, European society is well ordered. And les habitants de l'espérance, he says, go away, you evil charm, you punk of a monk. And then I turned towards heavens, lost to him and his own kind. Heavens more calm than the face of a woman who lies. I untied the monsters that I heard rise from the other banks of disaster. So what he's going to do, he's telling us that he is going to reveal to us, he's going to untie everything, he is going to unleash everything, he is going to shine a light. That same light that I told you about just now, at the end of the dawn, he's going to shine that light on his tongue, Martinique. So if we go to the next page, he says in the next page, in the second paragraph, he says, au bout du petit matin, bourgeonnant danse frêle de lentilles qui enfin, les Antilles relais de petits féroles, les Antilles dynamitées d'alcool, échouées dans la boue de cette baie, dans les poussières de cette ville sinistrement échouée. And it translates, at the end of the dawn, flowered with frail creeks, the hungry West Indies. And this is one of the themes that he's going to talk about. There are two things he's going to talk about here. He's going to talk about poverty, and he's going to talk about hunger. The hungry West Indies, pitted with smallpox, dynamited with alcohol, stranded in the mud of this bay, in the dirt of this city, sinisterly stranded. So let's look at that. Let's talk about that. And if anybody wants to stop me at any time and talk and give their own views about it, I'm saying. So at the end of the dawn, I told you he's going to shine this light, flowered with frail creeks. This West Indies that he's talking about, and look at the you have to look at the creative language and the imagery that he uses is flowered with frail creeks. Because you know there are no big rivers in the Caribbean islands; they're just creeks. The hungry West Indies. Now that's the first thing that comes up. The hungry West Indies. Now the image that the French always gave of the West Indies was that it was this place of dance and music where these Black people live, you know, of dance and music, of the beautiful beaches that they have. You know, they always, even in the French literature, they always painted this idyllic image of the French Caribbean. And these people who are happy and go lucky and they dance and they sing. But what he's telling us, underneath all of that, au bout du petit matin, there's hunger in the West Indies. These people are poor, right? They are pitted with smallpox, with disease, dynamited with alcohol. That is what is the principal product of the West Indies? There's sugar, and what is the byproduct of sugar? It's rum. The islands in the Caribbean are all noted for the rum. And what the rum does to you, I've seen it. What the rum does to you, they export it to Europe, but the people drink it. Why they drink it? They drink it to get rid and to hide and drown their sorrows and their hunger, right?
Right.
And these islands are stranded in the mud of this bay. And what he means by stranded in the mud of this bay is that they have no future. They have no place to go, you know? They have no place to go in terms of political development in France, you know? They're stranded in the mud of this bay, you know? And then he continues, he says, at the end of the dawn. And then he describes the island. He describes the island now. He says, au bout du petit matin, l'extrême trempeuse désolée échoue sur la blessure des eaux. At the end of the dawn, the utmost point, a deceitful, desolate scab on the wound of the waters. He says, this island of Martinique and the island of Guadeloupe, they are like a scab on the wound of the water, as if this sea, you know, one of the things about the Caribbean is the image of the sea. Whenever you think about what do you think about the Caribbean, the first thing you think about is the sea, right? And so this little island with all this poverty and hunger, it's like a scab, you know, like when you have a sore and the source it's like a scab on the waters. And in it, there are martyrs who do not bear witness. The blood flowers withered and scattered to the useless wind like cries of parrots, and all life smiling mendaciously, lips opened by discarded woes, and all poverty rotting under the sun silently, and old silence covering with tepid pustules the frightful insanity of our raison d'etre. Let me read that again. Let me read that little piece in French.
Yeah.
Une vieille misère pourrissant sous le soleil, silencieusement, un vieux silence crevant les pustules tièdes, l'affreuse inanimité de notre raison d'être. That is what their life is about. The old poverty rotting, and look at the imagery rotting under the sun, because it in Caribbean is sea, sun, and sand, rotting under the sun, silently, an old silence covering with tepid pustules. That's a strong word to use. You know what is pustules? Pustules is when you have an abscess. When you have an abscess,
Yeah.
and it's there ready to burst. That is a pustule. That's the one in that pustule. And then he talks about the frightful inanity of our raison d'etre, our being, our sense of being, right? At the end of the dawn, on this most fragile bulge of earth. Look how he calls the islands, a bulge of earth, because you know how those islands were formed. Those islands are actually volcanic islands. There are volcanic islands. And
like Montserrat.
Like Montserrat. They rose up out of that. In fact, in the other island, Guadeloupe, the mountains are like two mountains, and they call them les deux mamelles, which means the two breasts. Every time you go there, they talk about les deux mamelles.
Yeah.
So they are volcanic, and he described it as the most fragile bulge of earth, with which a grandiose future torments and humiliates. Torments and humiliates. The volcanoes will salvo the bare waves. So I want you to go down to the end of the page, to the next paragraph. Now he's
page 13.
Say page 30. So you notice the trajectory of the poem. He's now he is awakened, right? He tells us about the West Indies. I mean, the whole group of them. Now he's coming to his own Martinique. He's like moving from the general to the specific. So he's coming out to the city itself. This is the city of Port-au-France. And he said, at the end of the dawn, the city, flat, sprawled, tripped up by its common sense, inert, winded under the geometric weight of its eternally renewed cross, at odds with its fate, mute, baffled, unable to circulate the pith of this ground, embarrassed, lopped, reduced, cut off from fauna and flora. At the end of the dawn, the city flattened, slacked. In this inert city, this brawling crowd, which so astonishingly bypasses its cries, its motions, its meaning, calm, passive to its true cry, the only cry you want to hear, for it is all the city can say, because the sound inhabits some refuge of shadow and pride in this inert city, going by its cry of hunger, of grief, of revolt, of hate, this crowd so strangely babbling and mute. What an imagery!
Yes.
What an imagery! What an imagery, of this inert city, this brawling crowd, which so bypasses this. And then he goes on the next page and go down to the middle of it. in this inert city in the middle of page 15, in this inert city, this desolate crowd under the sun, which has no share. And now he's getting into the politics of it now. Now he's talked about the poverty and everything else. Now he's getting into the politics of it. He says, in this inert city, this desolate crowd under the sun, which has no share in whatever is openly expressed, which means there are people who are muzzled. They can't complain because, you know, the French authorities would you know, they jail them. You know, they have no opportunity to express themselves, which has no share in whatever is openly expressed, affirmed, freed on this island. No part in the French Empress Josephine's dreaming high above the poor Negro, nor in the liberator frozen with its liberating gesture in white stone, nor in the conquistador. No share in this room, this freedom, this audacity. What he's saying there, that the Black people at that time in Martinique, they were like still slaves, slaves to French culture, slave to French thought, slave to French politics. They had no say in their own destiny. They had no say. And this is the kind of thing that he realized now when he's in Paris. Because, you know, I told you, they all said that, you know, the image of the Caribbean was these nice, happy people. And when he arrived in France, he realized that because of his Black skin, he had no access to French society, you know, and so this is what he says now. They have no part. And the part about Empress Josephine, I don't know if you know the Empress Josephine, strange. No, why does he put Empress Josephine in his poem? Let me tell you, Empress Josephine was the first wife of Napoleon Bonaparte.
That's right.
Was the first wife of Napoleon Bonaparte. And where was she from? Where was she born? In Martinique.
Oh.
From the white, you know, the white colonials in Martinique. She was the daughter of one of the French prefets, right? So that is why he talks about the Empress, no part in the French Empress Josephine dreaming about the greatness of France, huh? High above the poor Negro. So that's why you have it inside there. She was from Martinique, yeah. And at the end of dawn, this inert city, and it's lepers. Consumption is another English word they use for tuberculosis. That is what used to be called in the old days, tuberculosis. And quite a lot of poor people got tuberculosis, so they call it consumption. This with its lepers, consumption, famines, fairs hidden in ravines, fairs perched in trees, fairs sunk in the soil, fairs drifting in the sky, accumulation of fairs with their fumaroles of anguish. That's, they're afraid. The people are afraid. They're afraid to say anything. They're afraid to step out of the cultural, political, and economic corral that have been placed there to keep them in check, you know, in check. And the reason why they first started to send these little boys like Césaire to France to study is that they would come back and keep the population in check. You know, on the slave plantation in the cane fields, you know, and cotton fields, there's a guy who they used to call the driver. Well, the driver, even here in America, they had it. That's the term in English, the driver. The driver was one of the same slaves. And you give him power. You give him a whip and a horse. And his job was to walk around, the people working, and anybody who slacked up, it was his job to lash them and keep them in line. So people like Césaire were being sent to France the bright boys, right? Very bright boys. And when they come back to Martinique, they were to work in the civil service, but the French were still going to be in control. But they're going to, and their job is to keep the rest of the population and to keep everything down quiet. One of the, I told you that Césaire earlier that eventually became a politician and the mayor of Martinique and in the French and a deputy in the French Assembly. So when he wrote this was in 1939, at the beginning of the Second World War. He returned to Martinique, and at that time, remember, France was occupied by Germany, and the president was a man called Vichy.
Yes.
He's talking about the Vichy regime, right? So he went back and started to work at the time of the Vichy regime, And during that time, there's a French poet called André Breton, a surrealist poet. Because when this cahier was first published, it was not very. It went unnoticed. But Breton, trying to escape the Vichy regime, went to Martinique, read the poem, and he is the one who gave it prominence. He's the one who gave it prominence. But the thing that I wanted to tell you about the end of the Second World War. So when the end of the Second World War came, and many of the countries in the Caribbean and also in Africa, at the end of the Second World War, that India was the first country in 1948 to get its independence from Britain. So there were these rumblings about the native people, managing their own business. And so what they did, they gave them an opportunity to decide what they want to do, whether they want independence or whether they wanted to be a part of France. And Aimé Césaire at that time, he was the one who supported the idea of continuing to be a part of France. Later on, he said he regretted it. It was the greatest mistake he ever made. So what happens today is that while all the other islands in the Caribbean, you talk about Barbados, when you talk to me about Barbados, all the other islands in the Caribbean are independent, even though little islands there. Yeah? But Guadeloupe, Martinique, and French Guiana are what they call in France. France is divided into departments. They call it département. They call them overseas department, département d'outre-mer. So they are overseas departments of France. They are an integral of the French structure, the French political, economic, and administrative structure up to today. So this man, Césaire, and this is the criticism of Césaire. This man, Césaire, who started out having this awakening about his blackness, who rallied and railed against French assimilation, opted to remain and supported the movement to remain a part of France. And that is a contradiction. And that is many people, his critics criticize him for that. And he admitted that he is the biggest mistake in his life. And today they're still departments of France. So that's it. The other criticism that is leveled against him is that he is protesting against assimilation, but this book of poems here that he has written is a reflection of his own cultural assimilation, because he writes it. They say when he wrote this book was not written for the ordinary man in Guadeloupe or Martinique. This book is written for French intellectuals because of its style, the difficulty of its language. It's in terms of literature, it is a monumental work. It is a very good work, right? But if you mix his politics, you see, he becomes a politician now, you know? So how do you put together his literature, his poetry with his politics and the ideas that he was trying to promote about rejecting assimilation and recognizing your blackness, what is your place and standing in the world? So that was another criticism of him, right? Yeah. And so as we talked to just now, Eddie, we were talking about at the end of dawn about this about Empress Josephine and this frozen with this liberating gesture, none in the they had no share in the scorn, no share in whatever was openly expressed. So now if you turn to page 19, 18 and 19, here's another example of it. In page 18 and 19, he says here, he's talking now, so he goes from the Caribbean to Martinique, to the city Fort-de-France, and now he's going to an individual. He says, and neither the teacher of the class, these children out of there that they're trying to form, the French are trying to form these little French people, black French people, to be their drivers. He said, and neither the teacher of the class nor the priest with his catechism can get a word out of this sleepy Negro lad, although they drum energetically on his shorn skull, for his voice is engulfed in swamps of hunger. Say a single word, just one, and the Queen of Castile will be forgotten. Say a single word, just one. Look at the boy who doesn't know a single of the 10 laws of the Lord. Who is the Queen of Castile? Miguel, you know who's the Queen of Castile?
Yeah.
It's Queen Isabella. It's Queen Isabella in 1494 to 1504. And she and her husband Ferdinand ruled under a unified Spanish empire. And what is known about her is they used to call her Joana la Loca.
Yeah.
You know, this man, he is well read. He is well read. He knows he's talking about, you know. And so he says his voice sinks in the swamp. And this little child here they're talking about, his voice sinks in the swamps of hunger. And there's really nothing to be drawn from this good for nothing but a hunger which can no longer climb to the ringing of his voice. So you have two sets of Black people. You have those who are being trained to be the drivers, the few like Césaire, and the mass of the people who go nowhere. The mass of the people who are still mired in poverty and hunger. And so this is, you can't get anything out of this little boy. Nothing but the hunger. Because if you're hungry, you can't learn. If you're hungry, you can't speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing but a hunger which can no longer climb to the ringing of his voice. A heavy and slack hunger. A hunger buried in the depths of the hunger of the starveling hill. You know, in French it says, car sa voix s'oublie. Dans le marais de la faim, il n'y a rien. Rien à tirer vraiment de ce petit vaurien qu'une faim qui ne sait pas grimper aux aigres de sa voix. Une faim lourde et vule. Une faim ensilvie au plus profond. I notice in the repetition that I told you about, you know, a hunger in French is faim, F-A-I-M, faim. Une faim lourde et vule, une faim ensevelée. And then he goes on to say, at the end of the dawn on page 21, the odd strangling, the exacerbated stench of corruption, the monstrous sodomies of the offering and the sacrificer, the dauntless prowls of prejudice and stupidity, the prostitutes, the hypocrisies, the lubricities, the reasons, the lies, the frauds, the concussions, the breathlessness of hard-hearted cowards, the smooth enthusiasm of budding bureaucrats. The budding bureaucrats, those are the big black. At the end of the dawn, great motionless night, the stars more dead than the perforated balafon. That's a nice verse. That's a nice verse there. Il disait, au bout du petit matin, la grande nuit, immobile, les étoiles les plus mortes d'un balafon crevé. Balafon is an African instrument. It's the African harp. It's a harp. It's the African harp, all made out of wood, and it plays the most beautiful sound. But if you crash it, if you smash it, so it's at the end of the dawn, the great motionless night, the stars more dead than a perforated. And one of the things he does all the time is to bring into his poetry the imagery of nature. All the time, the imagery of nature, about this great motionless, the stars more dead than a perforated balafon. The monstrous bulb of light, that's the moon, sprouting from our vile renunciations and our mad and stupid feats to revive the golden splashings of favored moments. And then he goes to page 23 now. Go to page 23 in the middle here. And this former joy brings me news of my present misery. And so you're talking about the simplicity of their life. But what does it bring you? Even in poverty, there is some joy in your life, because people find joy. But it brings me news of my present misery. A broken back street dives into a hollow where it scatters a few huts. An indefatigable road runs at full speed uphill and is at once swallowed by a puddle of houses. A foolishly ascending, daringly descending road, and that wooden carcass, which I call our house. And look at the imagery that he's going to describe his own house. A wooden carcass, right? Comically perched on small feet of cement. What a beauty, eh? On small feet of cement. It's iron coiffure. You know what they talk about the iron coiffure? Corrugating in the sun, you know what's that? That's the roof. They use corrugated, is those zinc sheets that are corrugated is undulating like that. So he called it this iron coiffure. A coiffure, I have to explain you the word. Coiffure is the same in English. Your head makeup, your coiffure is how you do up your hair. Your hairdo. Right? He said it's iron coiffure, corrugated in the sun, like skin hung out to dry. The skin hung out to dry, like the skin of animals that you hang out to dry, right? From the bare boards of the living room shine the bob nails, the nails shining from the boards, while the ceiling is striated by pine joints and their shadows, the chairs of spectral straw, the gray light of the lamp, and the varnish rapid glimmering of roaches tripping about. The varnish rapid glimmer of roaches tripping about. I know you live in the Caribbean, and you know that the cockroaches in the Caribbean are some big cockroaches.
Yeah, they are.
Brown. And when you see them running, it's like if they're polished, they're polished. So he talks about the rapid glimmer of roaches tripping about, that's the poverty we live. Infested, driven house. Okay. So I know we have little time, so I want us to move forward to page 36 and 37. See if you can get to page
Okay.
36 and 37.
Uh-huh. Here we are.
Right. And so this is all that I've described to you so far is this image that he now remembers of his native Martinique, the poverty in which he lived. He's in a better situation. He's in a different situation now, but that is the image that he had all the time. So now he says he's got to leave Europe, leave France. He's got to go back, right? So he says at the end of the dawn, in the middle of the page 37, at the end of the dawn, the wind of former times arises. This is what has been happening to him. The wind of former time arises. The wind of trust betrayed, of the uncertain duty which shines off, and that other dawn of Europe. And so he says it's time to go. Leave, partir, partir. Comme il y a des hommes hyènes et des hommes panthères juste around an homme juif. So he says, I'm going to leave just like how leopards leave, like how people all over the world leave their country. But he's not leaving, he's not fleeing the country, he's leaving to go back to the country. And that's the difference, right? He says, I can be like a Jew man, the Jews who were scattered all over the world. Kafir, those are the Arabs, right? Hindus from Calcutta, the Hindus were, the British carried the Hindus all over the world, even to Guyana, and to Africa, East Africa, and all over the world. The man from Calcutta. And a man from Harlem who doesn't vote. So he's internationalizing this whole thing here now. The famine man, the insulted man, the torture man, one can at any moment seize, beat up, or kill. And that is what he will become. Yes, really kill him without having to account to anybody, without having to excuse anyone to anyone. A Jew man, a pogrom man, a little like a bum. I should discover once again the secret of great communications and of great combustions. I should say storm, I should say river, I should say tornado, I should say leaf, I should say tree, I should be wet by all the rains, made damp with all dews. I should roll like frenzied blood in the slow current of the eye of the words, like mad horses, thoughts of fresh children, curfews. And what he's saying that why he wants to go back, he wants to rediscover the secret, what he called the grande communication, a grande combustion of communication and combustion. The storm, the river, the tornadoes, like the hurricane, the trees, the rains made damp with the dew. He wants to go back. And he wants to go back to see all of that, right? And so he says it again. If you go to page 40, he says it again. Partir, leave, to flee. My heart was full of generous hopes. Now, this is a different part of the poem now, where he's not dreaming of the past. He's talking about the future. He's going to leave Europe, flee, escape from the strangulation in France of French culture, to see if he can go back and bring some hope to his people. To flee, my heart was full of generous hopes. To flee, I should arrive lithe and young in this country of mine, and I should say for this land whose mud is flesh of my flesh, I wandered for a long time, and I am returning to the deserted foulness of your wounds. Because it's a wounded place. He sees it as the wounded territory. And he is returning to that wounded territory. And then, as of course, I told you about his political career afterwards in being the mayor of Fort-de-France and a deputy in the French French Assembly. So, I mean, the poem goes on and it develops. But I hope that by this I have given you a good little picture of to situate French Caribbean literature in the wider literature of not only the Caribbean, but the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean, right?
Yes.
And the greatness of this work, while there are some criticisms of it, but the quality of the work lives on. He was a great poet. He wrote other books, books of poetry, which I studied, like this one, Cadastre, other books of poetry. But this is his chef-d'oeuvre. This is his chef-d'oeuvre, right? This is his chef-d'oeuvre. So I hope that I've been able to give you a little picture of one. And there are many other Western writers. He also went to Haiti, and he talks about Toussaint Louverture later on in the poem. He even wrote a play about Le Roi Christophe. You always hear about Toussaint Louverture, but Toussaint Louverture was only the first. The Haitian Revolution took like a whole decade. And after Toussaint Louverture, there were two other men. There was Christophe and there was Dessalines. And Christophe was betrayed by the French. And so he wrote a play called La Tragédie du Roi Christophe, the tragedy of King Christophe. And he had Christophe dress up in Napoleonic uniforms and things like that, So he when he died in 2008, and Sarkozy was the president, and Sarkozy wanted to bury him in the Panthéon. The Panthéon in France is where the very great and famous people. Only 2 months ago, the great American poet, what's her name again? Oh my God, I read it now, I can't remember. Was buried there. A Black American poet was buried there, a woman. But the family of Césaire refused the honor because they say that they could not. He rallied against French assimilation, and you cannot bury him there, a man who protested against French assimilation. So they did have a ceremony there for him, in which Sarkozy spoke, but he wanted to be buried, and he was buried back in his native Martinique among his people. Yeah, that's where he was buried. Yeah.
Deacon Peter, let me ask you a question with the because I mean, on my end, you always hear about great, Latin American poets, but to me, I've, very little exposure I've gotten with, French poets. Was there a time where on both sides of the Caribbean where they come together? Not just Latin American, but French.
So one of the things that I must bring your attention is that in the entire region of the Americas, nobody struggled alone.
Right.
Césaire was influenced by the Americans, Claude McKay. You remember Claude McKay?
Yes.
In the English-speaking Caribbean, we were also influenced by so it was a kind of like a mutual support, not only in terms of intellectual works and works that form the basis of the struggle in the Caribbean and Latin America. So they all knew about and supported each other. Yeah.
Oh,
In
okay.
fact, I remember when I was growing up, it's the time of the civil rights movement in America, and it was broadcast on the radio and the TV. We didn't have TV then, but the radio. But we had people like Stokely Carmichael and Angela Davis who came to Guyana. Yes. And then we had people from Africa coming. Secretary, Kwame Nkrumah, all those people came. So there was a support, and they were influenced by the works of each other. Yeah.
Right.
Even the civil rights movement in America was also influenced by writers in the English-speaking Caribbean and French-speaking Caribbean. I forgot to tell you, one of the other famous books, and you must know that, of Césaire is a small book he wrote in the 1950s when he was mayor of Fort-de-France, called Discours sur le colonialisme, Discourse on Colonialism. And in it, he took to task the colonial powers for what they were doing to poor countries that they had formerly colonized. Yes,
Right.
it's a monumental work, and it's a work for which he is also well known, Discours sur le colonialisme. And there's another French writer, not a creative writer. There's a French writer also called Frantz Fanon, French Caribbean. He was from Martinique too, I think. Frantz Fanon, and he was a doctor, I think, and he wrote a book called Peau Noire, Masque Blanc, Black Skins, White Mask. What he was talking about is the cultural assimilation of Black people in French and English culture. So we are Black skins, but we wore white masks.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Deacon Peter, I got a question, and we talked about Barbados just for a few seconds, but
Yeah.
the influence of Black Lives Matters, how big is that influence on? Because I heard something about how Barbados decided to leave. You know, it's still part of the Commonwealth.
But let me tell you, but the Commonwealth is just a loose association of all the former colonized countries. But what happened in the administrative and political structure is that before these colonies became independent, there were political parties in each one of them, and they had elections, and they all, whoever won the election, you became the premier or prime minister. But the Queen's representative was the governor, right? And the governor remained on the island as the Queen's representative. And so when you got independence, what they did is that they just put on another word to it, and they called that person the Governor General. So they still recognize the Queen as the Queen of Barbados, the Queen of Guyana, the Queen of Trinidad, but the representative, a local person, was known as the Governor General. Now, in 1966, both Barbados and Guyana became independent. Trinidad was the year before, and Jamaica the year before that. And all of us had a Governor General as the head of state. We have a prime minister who did all the work, but you had a Governor General, head of state. Guyana, the next year, decided that it will no longer have the Queen, and Guyana is the first of the English-speaking territories to reject the monarchy and to have and become a republic. So since then, we in Guyana have a president. We were followed soon after by Trinidad and Tobago. But none of the other former British territories ever did anything. Now, what you must know about Barbados was the most British of all the islands in the Caribbean. It was. I mean, the royal family, even the royal family had property in Barbados and all kinds of things like that. It was the most British, so I was surprised.
Yeah.
Jamaica, who is more outward looking, is still hemming and hawing about it. Canada, the Queen is still Queen of Canada. She's still Queen of Australia. She's still Queen of New Zealand. Yeah,
Right.
And they're debating it. Hey, but we in Guyana, we were the trailblazers. We did it the next year. Trinidad did it. And it took all these years, 60-something years, before Barbados. And for Barbados, it's a big thing. Because, as I told you, Barbados is the most British of all the countries in the Caribbean.
Wow.
Yes. They're close. Yeah, close to mine. In fact, 2 years ago, I have a friend here, right here in America. She was being offered an OBE, is a British honor, and she was going to go to London to be received by the Queen, and she was happy about this thing.
I get you.
But one thing I must say about the language here, and it's also something in the English-speaking Caribbean, that if you think it's assimilation, you could think it's assimilation. But we learned to master the language, both the French, as he did here, because this is the master work. And even we in the English-speaking Caribbean, we're able to master the English language, sometimes even better than the English people.
Yeah.
When you talk about great orators, you talk about Winston Churchill and all of them. Oh my God, you should hear the Prime Minister of Barbados, 2 speeches that she made recently at the United Nations General Assembly and also at the climate conference. Without
Right.
any notes, she just had a few notes on her cell phone. Masterful, masterful. In fact, there's in Brussels, when the Europeans get together, they used to call us from the English-speaking Caribbean, les emmerdeurs éloquents. Now, how should I explain this to you? Emmerder, merde is the French word for mierda, right?
Yeah.
And so they made it into a verb. When you annoy people greatly, they say vous emmerdez quelqu'un.
Yeah.
Annoy people greatly. So they used to call us the eloquent troublemakers.
Right.
So,
I am going to on YouTube find those 2 speeches. You talk about the climate change, and then the
yes,
other one.
look for Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. Motley, Motley is her name. Listen to them; they're good. So I think we're over time, and I could,
Thank
this
you.
is a lot of stuff. I could continue here for the next 3 hours. I've got back into my professor mode.
Miguel Hernandez, Father, any comments?
Thank you for the presentation.
Oh, excellent then.
Good, that's good, yes.
Okay.
Father Miguel and Deacon Peter, remember this is the last presentation of the year, and I look forward hopefully for next year, and maybe we can just sort of take a little time and decide what we'd like to do again next year, if possible. That all depends on Father Miguel and Deacon Peter, and see how we can, try different things. Was I enjoyed this.
If I think about something interesting, next year I could do something else,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Au bout du petit
Thank you.
matin. Au bout du petit matin.
What does that mean, Father? I mean,
I just told you, au bout du petit matin, at the end of the dawn, at the end of the little morning. La madrugada, la madrugada. La madrugada. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Bye. Oh my God. That was great. Let me see, stop the video. And